Good morning, Peter. It is Wednesday, the 3rd of November. And I'm not even lying this time. First of all, I'm just going to read you the prologue I wrote for my nano novel, which hopefully will answer some of the questions you had in your last video. Sometimes it's difficult to imagine a time when Australia didn't have superheroes. Some groups reckon the government is messing with our DNA by putting stuff in the water, but that's bullshit. Others say that it's because we're on an island and our genetics are developing differently to the rest of the world. But with international travel being as easy as it is these days, they can't be right either. The only explanation that makes sense to me is this ozone layer theory. Back before we knew better, people weren't careful about what kind of chemicals they just let escape into the atmosphere. We just figured, what's the worst that can happen? Well, as it turns out, the worst thing was that some of those chemicals started eating a hole through this bubble of ozone the Earth had wrapped around itself to protect us from things like intense solar radiation. After a while, a little hole appeared in this protective bubble, and that lovely radiation began pouring down on top of whoever happened to be standing underneath. And as various experiments in the US have shown, you can't go standing around under that kind of radiation for 50 or so years without beginning to loosen the glue holding your genes together. All it would take is a slip in a pool of toxic waste, a bite from some irradiated insect, or perhaps getting struck by a bolt of lightning for some fairly interesting effects to arise. However it happened, about a decade ago, people with strange abilities began appearing. No one can say with any degree of certainty exactly who was the first Australian superhero, since they mostly kept to themselves in those early years. We do know that the Pulse was operating in Brisbane in the early 2020s, around the same time that Lazarus was first sighted in Adelaide. The large majority of Australian supers really only made themselves known after the Blue Jet stepped into the spotlight in Sydney. He made it socially acceptable to be differently abled, and ever since an increasingly large number of these superheroes have been appearing. Not that it's something to complain about. Due to the laws of the conservation of insanity, once people who wish you well get metaphysical abilities, so do those who would like to see you pushed into a well filled with weapons-grade plutonium and piranhas. Some of these superpowered sociopaths were things that you might expect to see on a Saturday morning cartoon, like the human bus. Honestly, what was up with that guy? Was he a bus that had gained consciousness? A man who grafted himself into the shell of a vehicle? Or something else entirely? Other early supervillains were a little creepier. There was that one guy who just drained people's brains of all active thought. Luckily, he found the Pulse's brain a little difficult to digest. Somewhere between the quieter risings of these earliest heroes in Brisbane and Adelaide, and the rather flashier appearance of the Blue Jet in Sydney, Melbourne had its own influx of super-abled persons. Most people will have heard of Gravitas, Gundam Girl, and those who came afterwards. But this isn't about them. This is about the one that brought them all together. This is the origin of Stormwalker. So just to quickly clarify, yes, superheroes have been appearing in other locations around the world, but those are due to reasons other than just the holes in the ozone layer. It's like the US has been conducting their own radiation experiments. Also, I'm setting my novel about 15 to 20 years in the future, so having the heroes age in real time, I'm fine with that, but perhaps not right now, because, as you said, this is not canon, this is just me getting some ideas out there. You also haven't answered a question of mine from, weeks ago. Did you go to, the Melbourne Nano kickoff party? Are you involved with any of that kind of stuff? Or are you remaining aloof and independent this year? I look forward to hearing you answer these questions of mine tomorrow.